the European Commission, who I used to work for, is forcing this on the accession states. All of this to stop people talking about gender, because all the rest of this stuff is still going on. Everyone's still talking about Gaza and Iran and NATO and Ukraine and the Green Deal. It's nobody stopped. It's gender has been shut down.
Welcome to the Cassandra Voices podcast, an Irish home for independent journalism with a global perspective. Our Cassandra Voices podcast offers cautionary tales and inspiring narratives to illuminate our own troubled times. We'll be putting out regular episodes reflecting the broad scope of our magazine's coverage over the last 6 years.
Róisín Michaux, welcome to Cassandra Voices.
Thanks for having me.
So, Róisín, how would you describe yourself?
I'm an unemployed Twitter TERF, Irish person. I like to write. I'm a mother. I don't know. Twitter TERF basically is what I do with my life. A kind of half journalism, half shitposting endeavour, I suppose.
You've been based in Belgium for a few years?
For nearly 20 years, yeah. Went fast.
We'll get into it, but you've also just made a trip and have been writing about it. Can you tell us where you've been, why you went and what you found out?
Yes. So I write about the gender issue, quote unquote, which is also known as the trans issue or the gender ideology, depending on where you come from, has lots of different names. But yeah, I write about the trans issue is probably what your audience knows it best as. And we, people like myself, there were lots of us, we are women who are very critical of one of the aspects of transgender ideology or the trans movement, which is erasing sex from the law. And that was done in Ireland. So sex was downgraded in favour of gender identity back in 2015 when Ireland introduced the Gender Recognition Act. Which was kind of a copy of the UK's Gender Recognition Act. Anyway, there's about 10 every country in the EU except for Hungary or Bulgaria, I can't remember. Or maybe both now, have some kind of legal gender recognition. And I write about EU politics, and I was very interested in I followed the legal gender recognition laws around the continent, and 10 of them are legal self-ID, which is that you just go into the municipality and you say, I declare myself to be the opposite sex, and away you go. Yeah. And the rest of them are the old model, which is like you need to have some various interventions, psychological assessments or surgery before you can do so. And I went to the Balkans last week because there were a number of countries that are lined up to join the EU. And even though legal gender recognition is not an EU competence, as they say in the lingo over here, even though it's not anything to do with the single market, or shouldn't be anything to do with the single market to allow somebody to legally change their sex on their official documents, it has become a requirement for all of these 10 accession states, including Ukraine, a country at war, to introduce some form of legal gender recognition if they don't have any. And if they do already have legal gender recognition, they are being asked to reform those legal gender recognition laws to make them more, I wouldn't say progressive, that's what activists would say. Trans activists would call them more progressive or more humane or whatever. I would say less or even more bananas. Like the call yourself the opposite sex version, sign a piece of paper and away you go. So the European Commission, who I used to work for, is forcing this on the accession states, and it's not saying that it's forcing this on the accession states, because if it were to come out and say it in any clear terms, it would get in a lot of trouble. The countries themselves, to varying degrees, are obeying this instruction to introduce this kind of legal gender recognition or self-ID. They're also not talking about it very much because they also know how unpopular these laws are once people know the details of them. So I said, right, you won't talk about it. I emailed everyone one. I was on Reddit trying to get people from Montenegro and Albania, because Montenegro is next on the list for accession. It's the closest. So I said, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to say to people, hey, do you know that by joining the EU, one of the conditions is that you have to allow anyone to change their sex for any reason by signature, which is what's on the table right now.
How would they be let know that that's what they have to do? You're saying that they're keeping it kind of quiet, the EU side, when they move them through the process. Do they transmit that information diplomatically, or are there policy documents that are sent formally and anyone can read them?
So this is the trick. The EU has no mandate in this area. As I said, they don't get to make laws about civil registries or identity. National identity has always been kept apart from the list of rules that the EU is allowed to oblige a country to adopt. So there is nothing, in the accession requirements, you have a list of chapters, and the chapters are bunched into clusters, and in those chapters there will be reform of your infrastructure, reform of your this, your that, but they don't touch taxes, they don't touch education, and they don't touch national identity because they're not EU areas. What is in the EU, what is an EU competence is the basic EU competence, the basis of the entire EU project, which is free movement. So the EU project, and this is the boring bit, you can stop me if it gets too detailed, but the whole point of the EU is that people, jobs, capital can move across borders seamlessly. That's why it exists. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why the EU is able to make laws on, for example, equality between men and women. So you might say to yourself, right, you're trying to operate a single market. Why on earth are you making laws that have anything to do with employment equality, for example? And there's a very simple answer to that anyone can probably guess. You can't have, for example, a real free market if a Dutch person wants to go live in Poland, but then they discover that by going to Poland to take up the job in the Polish branch of their Dutch company, they can get fired for being pregnant or breastfeeding. So in order to make the EU single market work, there has to be some protections for workers that apply across every member state. And that's just makes loads of sense. It's also the reason why, and this is where the mission starts to creep. It's also the reason why, no matter what you think about this, sexual orientation as a protected characteristic was added to an EU treaty in 1999. And that makes total sense for somebody, again, a Dutch person, because they've been very prominent in getting these things across the line in the EU. A Dutch person is not going to consider it a very free market if they can't go work in Greece or set up a company in Greece and then get hounded out of town because they have a husband, a man, a male and male on male, homosexual marriage or whatever. So what happens instead is the EU there are laws, direct laws, they're called directives or regulations. A regulation is where they say, right, this is your law now. You basically copy paste the entire law from Brussels into Dublin's laws. A directive is slightly different. Directive is like, achieve this end, we don't care how you do it. So they'll say, you need to make sure XYZ happens, but you can go about it in your own way. So there are directives that say you must treat men and women equally in the workplace, etc., etc. They would never come out with a directive or a regulation that says you must allow people to change their sex. So how is it now that this has become a requirement for Montenegro to join the EU? The way it has happened is that civil society, quote unquote, because that's the word they use, but it's not, it hides what's really going on. Mm-hmm. Civil society, which is NGOs, they receive money from the Commission budget to represent their constituency. So let's say it's gay people. So, or maybe let's take one that's to take a different one so that it's easier to understand. Maybe farmers or people who work in plastics or whatever. I don't know. There's a whole that's industry, so that's different. But let's say racism. The EU, as part of the free movement seamlessness, has directives on racism, anti-racism. And the reason they have that is because, again, you can't have a black French guy who thinks he's going to go work in Bulgaria, but he can't really because he gets fired for being black. So in order for the single market to work properly and for people to be able to move smoothly across borders into jobs, there has to be anti-racism. directives, and there is. So in order to make sure that this anti-racist principle is working in all the EU countries, the EU will say, right, who is going to make sure that this job is being done in the correct way and monitor the member states? And so that's why they give money to NGOs that work on against racism, to say, look, we need your input on this issue. So we want to make sure that you're monitoring what's going on in the member states so that we don't have to do it. And also we want you to represent the voice of marginalized communities, etc., etc. So in principle, I can understand why the Commission pays NGOs to represent these groups. But what happens in reality, and now I'm going to move on to the LGBTIQ example, because what has happened there, and that's how we got self-ID, pressure for self-ID in Montenegro, is that the Commission has paid what it's pretending on paper is gay rights, which we all understand it's in the treaties. Yes, of course, there's a directive about protections for sexual orientation. Of course, it's normal that the Commission would dedicate part of its budget to supporting civil society NGOs. Am I getting boring now, or?
No.
Okay. So the Commission is like, right, we're going to give you a shit ton of money. We're not just going to give you project money where we'll say, listen, can you do a little educational program that lasts 1 year where you teach, college students about gay identities or whatever, or the importance of gay rights. They give them operational funding. So what that means is they give them millions so that they can have salaries, electricity, computers, office chairs, and they do it on multi-year budgets. So the main ones, they get like a massive lump of money that lasts 2 or 3 years to keep the lights on, operational. And then on top of that, they get project money. So what does the Commission do? The Commission says to these organizations, right, please represent LGBTIQ people in the EU. And we're all supposed to pretend that, these guys are just upholding the treaty and the prevention of discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. But these organizations are full of nutcases. And there's no massive, this is the thing, it's all very boring. It's just, there's this, on paper, there's bureaucratic need to support civil society, when in fact, what was once gay rights has morphed, as it has in every country, into something unrecognizable. And it's full of what I consider to be insane people who are on this queer trip, which means breaking down all categories and it's this real weird Judith Butler version of the world. Most of the people who work there are upper class people who are playing around with their identities, and essentially what we've ended up with is the Commission is paying these people and then saying to them, make sure, here's some money, make sure that your needs are met. So what are the needs of these crazy queer theorists? It is sex self-ID. So they go to the European Court and they say, look, we actually don't think that you can have a real free movement of people if you're male in this country, but they won't recognize you as male in that other country. So they've been going with project funding specifically called strategic litigation funds that they're getting from the Commission. So I'm thinking specifically about 2 NGOs right now, which is ILGA Europe and Transgender Europe. They've been getting money that is specifically earmarked for court cases, and they're going to the European Court, the Court of Justice of the EU, and they're saying, look, it's all planned from the very beginning. They say that the very first one that they won was a Romanian girl who was studying biology in the UK, and this is pre-Brexit. This is how long these things take. Pre-Brexit, the case is called Mirren. She got her gender recognition cert in London, and then she moved back to Romania. I doubt she was moving back to Romania for any other purposes other than to take this strategic litigation case. She went back to Romania and she's like, look, I can't be a man over here like I am over there. That doesn't really help that doesn't really sound like free movement to me. So she takes the case to court, and then the courts in her own country, and so even though this case began before Brexit, for the purposes of the case, we were pretending Brexit never happened. The courts, usually what happens is if they have a tricky question like this, they pass it up to Luxembourg, which is where the Court of Justice of the EU is based. And the court in Luxembourg has one mission and one mission only, and that's further integration of the EU. So if those judges come across a case that makes it less easy to integrate everyone across borders, they're going to rule in favor of whatever is the most integrationist. And so in the case of this Mirren woman, she was able to argue that in Romania she needs to have her gender recognised. That has been done on the basis of old school legal gender recognition and now also self-ID, where there's someone who is claiming that, oh, but I got it so easily in this country, but now you're making me do this. That's not very free market and free movement of people. So that's how it's happened. So we now have case law. So all the Commission has to do in Montenegro's accession document checklist is follow the case law, meet all the requirements as laid out by case law. So they don't even have to get into it. What they did was they gave the money to NGOs. The NGOs made the strategic litigation, and then the case law is created, and then the Commission only has to say, oh, it's nothing to do with us. We funded civil society, and this is what they've done with the money.
So basically, nothing needs to change. Montenegro joins, and then the first time there's any kind of court case like that, it gets referred upwards, and then the decision comes down, and Montenegro has to change its laws.
No, I don't think. Well, not really. That could happen, but
they won't be allowed in until they change.
Exactly.
Okay.
So Montenegro.
One question before you move on. So, because you mentioned in your current substack, like the EU court president who's just been re-elected, who's a Belgian, called Lenaerts or something. Is that correct? And you earmark like this justice as kind of someone who's highly integrationist. I mean, that's the plan. But I just want to know, I mean, how cyclical is this? Because you're saying the NGOs are being paid, they're going and bringing the case, they're lobbying within society, but then they'll fund or push a kind of one interest in a court case. But are they not being directed also by effectively the EU court themselves? Is it not effectively also this president of the EU court who's subtly or not so subtly giving out instructions for all of these people, moving all the pieces?
I have to say, of all the institutions, and there are many involved in this, the Court of Justice of the EU is one that I know the least. I mean, it's in Luxembourg. I've been told that it's staffed with woke people and what I call power gays, which is just basically gay men who are like careerist, ambitious gay men who don't give a shit about women. And so I've heard that the CJEU, the Court of Justice of the EU, is stacked with power gays and woke people. But I don't know anything about that. But what is quite possible is that the Commission itself, the ones who are handing out the budgets, what I've seen from the inside, having worked there, is that they wouldn't be giving money for this strategic litigation if they didn't want the outcome. They know what it's going to be for. Yeah. So there are a lot of people inside the European Commission. There are two particular units, departments that are responsible for deciding who gets this money. It's completely opaque.
By design.
By design, but they would have their own objectives. So, I mean, but think about it, even before we get to funding, you're the Commissioner for Justice or whatever, and Equality. It changes every few years, they change title, whatever. It's the same vibe. You're the head of department for equality, and you're deputy head of department for equality, and you have a meeting with civil society. Sounds great on paper, right? So the NGOs come in and you say to them, okay, like imagine there was TERFs invited to these meetings sitting alongside them. We'd all be saying, this is what our community needs. This is what we want. This is what we need. The Commission has a perfect paper trail. They're saying, we're doing what we were asked by civil society. They can't go around and ask every single person in Europe, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, and maybe it's boring. I don't think it's boring. But the big difference between how the EU government works and how national government works is that it's the permanent bureaucracy. It's the deep state, as Trump would call it, which I used to laugh at when Trump won, because I was like, oh, it's so conspiratorial. But I really believe the deep state is real, folks. It's out there, and they are...
it's an older concept. He didn't, like lots of great things, he didn't make it up, I mean,
exactly.
It comes from Turkey, actually. Yeah.
Oh, right. I didn't know that. But I don't mean to say he made it up. But when I use the term, it sounds like I'm going to go off on a QAnon one. But what I mean, like, I'm aware that it's as a shitlib, you're supposed to pretend there's no such thing, which I used to think there was no such thing. But I realize now it is completely real. In the Commission, that there were people since forever who were there who are, they have these kind of interests. They see I mean, like most people around us, like they see, oh, this can only be a good thing, forwards, not backwards, whatever the rainbow people say, give it to them because this is what sets us apart as the most progressive continent, whatever, you know, they're there and they're very, very much involved in deciding the direction. This is what I was going to say. The difference between the Commission and other national governments is that deep state is the one that generates the laws. So we don't have that. What we have is, I don't understand politics that well, but I know that it's elected people bring bills to the table and say, I want to pass this thing. In the Commission, that's not how it works. And the reason is because if it were to be the politicians in the European Parliament who were proposing the bills, it would be all Germans. This is my understanding of it. Anyone please write in, say if I've misunderstood it. But my understanding is that because the ratio of, like, Malta has 500,000 people and Germany has like 70, 80 million.
Yeah.
So the way to balance it out is to put the commissioners, which we could call the equivalent, the ministers, make the ministers one from every country, and it's their departments then that propose laws. But so what you really have is you have the permanent civil service coming up with all the laws, not the Parliament. The Parliament is just a debating chamber over the laws that are conceived in the permanent civil service. That's kind of a problem. And so the permanent civil service is in Brussels, it's the elites of all the countries come to Brussels for good salaries, especially from Eastern and Central Europe. All they're the best people from Bucharest and Budapest. And they're trying to, and this is maybe sounds insulting to some people from Budapest and Bucharest, but there's a pressure to look woke and progressive. So you would think there'd be a bit of a firewall there, but there's not. It's actually kind of, I think it makes it worse because you've all the Nordics. The Nordics actually don't take jobs in the European Commission because they hate Brussels because it's dirty, and the salaries are better where they live. So you've got a lot of Italians, a lot of Romanians, a lot of Irish people since Brexit, and everyone's trying to be the most progressive EU-branded, EU-coded person they can be. And there's very little resistance. Like, even though we had an election that brought in more right-wingers, that doesn't trickle down to the civil service.
Did the law change in Romania following the case that you just described?
I think that how these things work is that it takes a lot long. It doesn't happen like that overnight. It did actually. The situation in Romania is, oh no, that's Poland. Hold on, I'm mixing up my countries now. In Romania, what will happen is often those outcomes, they might be, if they're very good boy countries, they'll do it immediately, like Ireland would do it immediately if they were told to do it. But with countries like Romania, it might take a year or two of putting pressure on the government. And so a lot of these things, like the CJEU ruling is a real blunt instrument. It's a whopper. Like, you know, it's like the court has found you in breach. Like, you need to change this law immediately. But the government still has to draft a new law, table it and get it through, you know. And the activists who were responsible for bringing the strategic litigation in the first place use this order from Luxembourg to beat politicians over the head with, sometimes for years. So some of the way activism works here and in every country is that you get the UN body to say this, you get the to say that, you get the foreign office of that country to say this, and then you beat politicians over the head with it. That's what it's for. So the CJEU ruling is like a top tier cudgel. So if Romania, I actually don't know what stage it's at, but I know that a lot of the focus has been on these countries where they don't have self-ID yet. And one of the ones that we're all waiting for is Poland, because Poland had a bad guy, Putin-friendly, you know, right-wingers, populists in government until very recently. And now this new guy, Tusk, I think it's Tusk, who took over, we're all like, okay, he's going to fulfill all of the Brussels dreams now because he's there. So everyone's waiting for him to do all the things. And he's been doing some of it. Peter Magyar, who replaced Viktor Orban, the pressure on him to undo or to introduce the laws that Brussels have been, and the courts have been telling him to do for years, the pressure is huge on him. But so whether or not Romania has yet done it, I actually don't know. But that's, you know. That's
the comparison point. And I know Hungary is convulsing. It seems like their president has just been forced out. I want to double check that, but something has just happened there. And
he was an Orban guy,
That's right, yeah. So let's go to your trip. So you managed to make it to Albania and Montenegro. These places, of course, you've just described the whole process by which coercion or, process happens when countries are inside the EU. But these guys have not joined yet. So you wanted to go and speak to people in person. You wanted to find out how they might respond to what you thought would be new information, because you're saying people are deliberately left in the dark or misinformed about how things may change should they join the EU.
Well, I mean, obviously they know that this mad shit is on the table. Like, it has come up. It is not a huge focus because they've so many other problems. But I think what I really wanted to understand in Albania and Montenegro was this, and maybe if it's too complicated, just stop me. But
okay,
I wanted to understand, as a TERF, as a gender critical woman writer, I find it very difficult. It's almost impossible to convince people that you're not a rabid conservative, because there's only two boxes. One is pro all the woke things and the other is anti all the woke things. And I'm actually, along with loads of women that I know, we are of the left, as you say, or we're progressives in every way almost, except this weird sex falsification thing. And we see it as a very progressive thing to say, no, you can't let men who have fetishes, we can get onto that later, pretend to be women for all purposes. So I consider myself a progressive, but I got put into this box of being a right winger, which was really a shock to me. I used to it now and I don't care, and I don't lend any weight to those labels. And I wanted to know, is it possible over there to say this legal sex falsification is bullshit while at the same time being pro-EU? Because it seems to me like if they were over here, they wouldn't be able to do that. You can't, everyone sorts you into a category. Once you say this transvestite stuff is not for me, they're like, oh, you're a Trumpist then. Oh, you're paid by Orban. This is what I got, a lot. And you go, oh no, well, hold on a minute. I don't even have an opinion on any of those things, but transvestite bullshit is bullshit. So I wanted to go to Montenegro and Albania and say, listen, you're free here, from what I can tell, looking on the internet, like especially Reddit, on subreddits for Montenegro and Albania, which is not a good proxy for how society thinks and feels, but it's a bit of a hint. They're freer to say unorthodoxies about some woke stuff than we are, because they're more conservative socially, and they're not zombified by this uber progressive left illiberal nonsense like we are. So I want to go over and say, do you, maybe like it's very specific, do you feel like you can oppose certain EU crazy social laws in particular while at the same time being pro-EU? Or is it left and right conservative? Is it Trumpy woke? Like, is that the divide over there as well? Or, can you push back on this without being accused of being part of the Serbian Orthodox Church who wants to join? You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's a stupid thing to want to know, but I was really curious about it. I tried to find out online from people, how is the divide over there? And obviously the politics are so different. It doesn't fit into neat categories, but indeed what I found was that people, especially in Montenegro, because Montenegro's next on the list, if you want to be seen as a good lib, pro-EU, all that stuff, you will not criticize this publicly, because I contacted everyone I could think of. I didn't contact any journalists for some reason, which afterwards I was like, I should have. But I contacted all the organizations and all the NGOs that do stuff around gender, women, rights generally. And I contacted individuals. I went to particularly in Albania, I went to the Flamingo Revolution and I looked for people who were waving EU flag stuff. And I basically reached out to everyone. I was like, I want to know, is it possible to criticize self-ID and still be considered a good candidate for EU accession? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So,
and they didn't want to answer, right?
Anyone who wanted to be, and this is very self-serving and completely understandable, anyone who ever wants to make a good go of it in libland of the EU is not ever going to say to some TERF who is professionally unpersoned, not that they knew it, but so when you talk to people, you go, hey, I want to talk to you about the EU. And the first thing they want to know is, are you pro-EU or anti-EU? And so, they're like, are you here? Have you been sent here by Putin? Like, have you been sent here by JD Vance? Like, they're like, who are you? What do you want? And you say, I want to talk about the EU. Okay. Which side are you on? They want to figure out if you're left-wing, right-wing media. And you're like, well, I don't actually really care. I just write about women's rights. Okay. And then they're like, women's rights, intriguing. And so you clearly want women's rights. You're like, right. But it's about LGBTIQ stuff. And then they go, oh shit. And then they go, okay, well, I'm pro that. And you're like, okay. You have to really break it down for them. And you can imagine what it's like walking in the Flamingo Revolution in Tirana at nighttime, thousands of people around you screaming and shouting to fuck Eddie Rama and fuck Kanye West, because his concert was happening at the same time while I was there. Trying to explain to people the very nuanced question that I had. It was absolutely impossible. So mostly what I did was I said to people, here's my card. I want to talk about something very controversial, anonymity guaranteed. And then quite a few of them have gotten back to me, and I've been doing interviews the last few days. But none of the professionals...
Remind what the Flamingo Revolution is, please.
The Flamingo Revolution started because the president of Prime Minister of Albania has sold the country's only island, or was trying to sell the country's only island to the Trump family, to, what's his name, Kushner.
Jared Kushner.
And this is very bad for ecological reasons. And so the protest started as an ecological thing, an environmental thing, but it just spilled over into everything because everyone's been angry at him for years about everything. And it just so happened the weekend I was there, Kanye West was playing, and Kanye West had been invited by the Prime Minister. He had built a special stadium, a temporary stadium just for the concert. And then when they didn't manage to sell out all the tickets, he subsidized him with €4 million. So people were absolutely raging because they're not, the budget for hospitals, education, everything has been cut. So
oh my God.
So what people are really angry about there, and the people I spoke to are really angry about, is that the EU is being extremely hypocritical because they are ignoring all of his terrible, terrible deeds and his illegal deeds because they want Albania in. So the woman who's responsible for all these negotiations on the Brussels side, she's apparently while I was there, somebody wrote to me and said, do you notice she's ex-fucking secret police from Yugoslavia or whatever? So the whole region is a bit of a mess. She has ignored some very important things that he's done. And now, yesterday I spoke to an Albanian woman who said, she just said, in the last couple of days, the EU woman said, Oh, we spoke about that island, selling that island to Jared Kushner. That's not going ahead. We sorted that all out even ages ago before the discussion. That was never going to happen. Don't worry. And now apparently this is what I heard the latest. The deal is off. And they're just like, you bitch, you didn't say that to us before. You could have said that at any moment. So there's some shenanigans going on. So the people in Albania see these shenanigans and they're just like, right, don't trust him. Don't trust the EU. Don't trust anyone. And when I asked him specifically about Albania's legal gender recognition, bear in mind that Albania has no type of gender recognition at all, not even the old school version. So they're starting from scratch. When the government came up with its proposal to introduce this legal gender recognition, people flipped out and said, what is this nonsense? We're not importing this bullshit over here. They tried to replace the words also mother and father with parent one and parent two. In this gender equality bill and a self-ID bill and all this stuff. And the only people who were very scathing about it were the Orthodox Church. And so this Orthodox Church does what the Orthodox Church does, which is call everyone faggots and say terrible things about gay people. And then the commission came out and said there is no place for hate, and it's like, right, but can you also address the fact that we're talking about a law that would completely nuke our concept of the family and, women's rights and all this stuff. And the commission, of course, won't address that. So they're just pretending it's not happening. So the idea, the Flamingo Revolution has turned into a boiling pot of everything that's been wrong in the country for many, many years. And it's like Albania has 90% approval for joining the EU, but they're not happy about it. You know what I mean? Their situation is just so bad.
That's funny. It reminds me of Georgia. We don't need to get into Georgia, but I did live in Georgia. We could if we have time, but the Georgian population are kind of divided, but even their politicians were forced into this strange charade where they keep saying, yes, we want to join the EU, while actually often doing the exact opposite of what the EU says is required to do
That's
that.
Exactly it. That's exactly it. Because one of the women I approached in the Flamingo Revolution March, she was holding a sign with a big EU stars on it, so the EU symbol, and then on the inside it had some text, and I said to her, what does that say? And basically it said, Eddie Rama, the club you want to join, you've already broken the rules. So you keep breaking the rules of the club you want to join. So this is what they want. They want the Commission to force the reforms that they need, not Brussels' checklist, but their checklist. They want an end to corruption and an end to the real problems that they have before they can, as a condition of joining. Whereas they're just, it seems like real mafia stuff at this point, because the Commission is just like, yeah, we'll just ignore that. We'll ignore that, So.
And Montenegro, briefly?
Montenegro, you mean my experience on the ground there, or what their reaction is?
Any quick comment, because you managed to get these two countries, Montenegro being even tinier. Actually, Albania isn't that tiny, but Montenegro is really tiny.
600,000 people, and I had been to Sarajevo years ago. I was in Bosnia many, many years ago, like 20 years ago or something, and I remember, I don't know if you've been there. Have you been to Sarajevo?
No, not been to that whole part of the world. No. To Greece. It's Greece, which is technically part of the region.
It's part of it. It's absolutely shockingly beautiful. Montenegro is just one of the most pristine, beautiful places I've ever seen. Wow. Yeah, it's got like Europe's only old forest left, like prime, whatever it's called, like original forest, old growth or whatever it's called. Yeah. It's called Montenegro, Black Mountain, not because the mountains are black, which they kind of do, but because the forest is so dense. Like, it's absolutely shockingly beautiful. There's only 600,000. When I was in Sarajevo, you get this real weird, creepy feeling of knowing that people stood on the hills on either side of the valley and shot down into the valley at people trying to cross the road. And then there's graves everywhere of all the Bosniaks that were killed. And it's just like, it's giving me goosebumps just thinking about it. There's a real weird vibe of something bad happened here not so long ago, and everyone's like a bit traumatized. And Montenegro, I sort of felt that as well. And one of the main manifestations of that is that there's so many international entities everywhere. So you're walking down the street and you're like, oh, there's the German region of whatever office delegation, and there's NATO. Oh, there's, you're walking this really pristine place, very small town, Podgorica. I wouldn't even say it's a city. And you've just like EU office there, German Bundestag there, NATO there, EU office for that thing there. Everywhere there's just like infrastructure, that buildings and, people have been moving into offices and taken over the country, essentially. That's what it looks like, in a place that feels kind of raw from war. So there was a real weird vibe as well. And so when I was there, people were, I was trying to talk to people, and it was very difficult because, as I said, if you were hoping to get out of there and get a good job in the knowledge sector in the EU at some point, you're hardly going to sully your prospects by talking to some fascist like me. So people nobody, when they meet me on the street, they don't know, am I going to go put this, is this a video? Am I going to be quoted? Am I going to ruin my prospects? I was young once, my children were very small. If somebody had tried to nuke my career prospects by getting me to say something unfashionable, I would absolutely have walked away. So I got that feeling. I got that feeling from a lot of people. So I was like, right, I need to approach people who are not looking to have Eurolib careers. And I don't mean joining the EU civil service, although 600,000 people, you probably get half of them into the commission, so big. But I mean, people who of a certain class, and the gender thing is a class thing. All the women's groups are going along with the trans shit and so they would not touch me with a barge pole. And any other person who I got the impression was an educated person who might be planning on fleeing to Berlin to get a good NGO job, absolutely not a chance they would talk to me on the record. So I had to go lower class. But then anyone lower class doesn't speak English. Or anyone too lower class doesn't speak English. So there was a sweet spot in the middle. This is what I was writing about in my newsletter. There were people who you could talk to so the people, I ended up finding people, quite a few who we'll see how many of them contact me to talk to me, but I have a couple of interviews that I've done and a couple lined up.
Okay. Well, I can say one thing I do know about Montenegro that I read in a book by one journalist. Might have been Misha Glenny, might have not been. But anyway, I read in one place that at some point for years, their whole economy was running on smuggled cigarettes and petrol, like those two things and nothing else.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Famous for this.
And I got the feeling when I was there, I was like, I reckon this whole economy is running on NGOs now.
Well, this is it. I mean, to mention Georgia, don't have to go into it too much, but it really was the case. I was there during some moments of crisis just before and just after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But they already had a political crisis there. There's one big main thoroughfare and one kind of place, a square of freedom. They march up and down this thing, all the different groups. And more recently, just before, as it seems their accession status has been paused by the EU now. After various crises. You basically had what's called civil society and a whole NGO educated youth who, are not going to have a great source of income ordinarily, and maybe their arts, groups and all this kind of stuff, with money flowing in, and that becomes their career. And then when USAID was cut off, quite a lot of the protesting went quiet. And likewise, if you go and try and test people, like, their ideology and stuff, it's hard for them to really engage in debate because they're, in a sense,
on the hook.
Ask a man, if his salary depends on it, he's quite likely to be, to not question it. So
that's exactly what I went there to sort of test. And I absolutely became very clear that is the case. And there might be Montenegrins who just go, shut up, you're full of shit. You spoke to 20 people. That's not a good sample or whatever. But, I will say last thing about the Montenegrins and the Albanians, though. Very fine people, very European. That's going to sound racist, but this is Europe. Like, and walking around just going, Tirana, I expected, because Albania has such a bad reputation. And everyone, when I said to my mom, I'm going to Albania, she was like, oh God, be careful. And everyone said to me, oh my God, watch out. And I was just like, yeah, I've heard it's a shithole. And then I got there. Tirana is insane. If you love this brutalist communist architecture, which I do, I find it extremely funky and cool. I just loved it. Like, Tirana was amazing.
No, I don't. But anyway.
I know. It's a whole thing. It's like ugly, but there's something about it. But very fucking European. Sorry, excuse the French. Very European. Absolutely. Tomorrow, those people come join us. Well, if it weren't
maybe all their most incredibly dangerous mafia bosses are actually in London, throwing their rivals in the cocaine trade into the Thames.
I think so. Hopefully, we can get them all into NGO jobs. Like, why not?
So let's pause all that and go into your story, if that's okay. So, I follow this debate region online on an undeniable thing, a really noticeable thing, which adds to a sense of strong irritation on my part, just among many in the Irish things the Irish media does, is this debate, which has moved into a kind of frenzy. It's gotten really vicious in lots of ways. It's coming to a head in courts around the democratic world. But it's within the kind of nexus in Europe and the focus in the UK. It's got all these Irish women that are quite brilliant. There's a list with Stella O'Malley, Helen Joyce, Colette Colfer, who's in Ireland. The previous two, I think Stella maybe is in Ireland too now, but there's people moving back and forth in the UK.
Yeah, Helen's from Bray, Stella's from Roscommon or somewhere Tipperary, but there's also Anya Palmer, who was the woman the main defence in the Forstater case. She's also Irish.
And then I noticed your commentary, just started reading it and so on, and you're pretty straight up because your story had just kind of come through, at least like, your head to head in your career with your employer had just happened. And it annoyed me also that this the Irish media world, which will pick up on like the slightest mouse heartbeat of Irish importance around the world in anything, won't talk about this, won't touch it. They'll occasionally, maybe they had on Graham Linehan once to attack him and so on. So that was there in my mind. But then, I'd like you to talk. If you are willing, could you talk about where you come from in Ireland? What, a little of what it was like for you growing up, how you got to work in the EU, and then what happened there?
Yeah, so I grew up in Jobstown. I was born in the Coombe, and the first place we lived was Kilnamanagh, and then we moved to Jobstown. And my mother's a single mother, so this might have something to do with it, but I've never met my father, and I grew up in a very, very rough time. Jobstown in the 80s, it was extremely hardcore. We were very poor, but we weren't, I don't necessarily come from a impoverished lineage, you might say. There's this old story. This is very suitable for your podcast because it's all about ye old Irish stuff. I mean, it's partly about Irish history, but isn't it? Am I right? This is a very Irish heritage story. You know, the way back in the day, this is how I always understood the world worked 100 years ago. The eldest son got everything and everyone else got kicked out of the house.
Yeah, and very often people got scapegoated as well. Not just the top guy got a lot, but the person on the bottom could have a really bad deal. They could end up having to look after the parents or take on some other onerous duty.
Yeah, so my mum was the youngest of 7 or 8. She got kicked out, basically. Everyone got kicked out. She was only like 16 or something. So she got launched out, and your man moved in he's still around. He's still my uncle. I saw him a year ago. He bought me a pint, no hard feelings. But my mum was left out on her own. She ended up in Jobstown. The man that she met and had 2 kids with her battered her and left her. So that might contribute to my upbringing, probably contributes a little bit to, and the things that I saw growing up in Jobstown and experienced, which you can imagine, a single mother has to leave her kids with all sorts of randomers. Stuff happens, you see things, you know. Rough, just really, really rough. I have a brother. I won't go into any details because it's very sensitive, but he didn't quite make it through as well as I did. Got caught up in things, very sad stories, very difficult time. But my mum was very hard worker, and so she did a civil service job, test, whatever. She ended up getting a job in the civil service, and then she just made a really good job of her career and pulled herself out of poverty. So what that meant was that I've always been exposed to the absolute dregs. It's not even the working class. Jobstown, where I grew up, was not working class. I always found this term really funny, working class, because I was like, nobody here works. The ones who work are selling heroin and that's it. And I discovered much later that this would be classified as the underclass, which is really insulting. And I'm not saying I use that term myself, but I grew up among the underclass, having a family of rich farmers who, you know, just basically abandoned my mum at the roadside when she was very young. So I had those 2 experiences. Then I also had the experience then of when I got old enough, I left home quite early, and then I spent quite a few years living in Bray. So here I was exposed to another class of people, which were like bohemian type, you know,
Sinead O'Connor.
Yeah, and I played music in a band in Bray. I was a singer. I was a busker for a few years, so I was exposed to that. Yeah, so I've seen sort of all classes of people. I've spent time among all classes of people. I think this is why this informs my I think it informs my confidence also.
And your vocal projection.
Maybe am I very vocally projecty?
No, you can. I mean, you can do it writing, typing wise, and speaking wise, both the same kind of force.
Maybe, but this is why. So what happened was eventually my mum, who was working for the civil service for years, she was asked would she go work in Brussels for a couple of years on behalf of the Irish government. So this is a thing that some people do. So she went over to work in Brussels for a couple of years, and I was off living in India, and she said, hey, I live in Brussels now. And I was like, what's that? You know, and she was like, come join me. And she was like, she was working in finance. She said the arse has fallen out of the Irish economy. This was 2008. And she said, don't go back to Ireland. Whatever you do, there's no jobs anymore. And this was, she saw it coming because she was actually working in consumer credit and mortgages. So she saw it. And I think people had been warning for years that something very bad was going to happen. So she said, why don't you come to Brussels to hang out with me? So I was like, okay. So that's how I ended up in Brussels. I don't have a degree of any sort. I did 3 years in Dundalk. I studied basically computer support, and this was the era of, I feel a bit like Forrest Gump, because it was when all the tech companies were really setting up and they needed people to staff their. Sorry, this was before I left. When I came out of school, they needed white. I don't know why I said white. They wanted Western European, English speaking, non-Indian people to staff their call centers. And I basically was trained up to work in a multilingual call center. That was what my training was.
Yeah.
So when I arrived in Brussels, I didn't really have any qualifications, never mind a master's or anything. So I just started teaching English, in one of the private schools. And so I just spent a few years just talking to everything from like Hyundai executives and lobbyists to commission officials to people on the dole, because people on the dole got these vouchers. So basically I met every single person in Belgium through teaching English. Wonderful time, had great crack, all that stuff. And then, I eventually got a job in a commission. And there I was, my 3-year national diploma or whatever it was called was turned into an ordinary degree overnight at some point, and somebody pointed it out to me and said, you kind of have a degree now, so you can maybe apply for these very well paid commission jobs. So I did, and I got one of the quite junior but very, very well paid. So the thing about working in the commission in the EU is that you don't pay any tax, and so you get a massive salary compared to everyone else, and so you live really, really well.
I see.
Yeah, so everyone...
I kind of thought that with your name being Róisín Michaux, I thought that maybe, you had like a whole French or Belgian side of the family, and that you grew up partly in Belgium or something, and then...
No, not at all. No, my family name my legal name is Kelleher, but I took on my partner's name, which is Michaux. So I met him immediately. Yeah, so I'm Róisín Michaux, but I went to a Gael school in Jobstown, by the way, because it was the only safest option, but it was like a prefab with 5 people in it,
Yeah.
So I grew up in this. So I feel like I was exposed to all these different environments and stuff. Then I come to Brussels, I'm meeting everyone. Then I finally go into the commission, and then I'm surrounded by the elites, the public administrative elites of all the EU countries. So I'm in my element. Like, I'm just meeting everyone, having a great time. But I did start to notice, people who work in these jobs, they have no idea what the real world is like, and that was really disturbing. It wasn't disturbing at first because I just wanted to make money. Who cares? I wanted to be able to buy a house, all that stuff. But once I had bought a house and, squeezed the system for what I could get out of it, had my children who are all now safe and in their teens, everything, I was like, hold on a minute, there's something wrong here. So I feel a bit bad about it because I sort of took advantage of the system for years, and then I started to criticize it. I got very critical of it because I came across the trans issue a bit before lockdown, maybe 2020 or something. I started writing under the name Michaux, and I had this substack that I started writing about the issue because I just thought, this is unreal, and as soon as people know that it's happening, it's going to stop. And I sort of got obsessive about it, and eventually it led to me losing my job in the commission.
But you weren't like, you said to me before that you were almost involved in, say, the planning to put on the little plastic tether that now collects the caps to the bottles that So we can actually thank you for that. That was your gift. That was your gift to us.
There was a time, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but there was a time when history was over, everything was brilliant, and people in administrations, in bureaucracies all over the Western world were just like, what'll we do now? Let's move on to the turtles,
Herein lies much of the rub, because
I think so.
I mean, within this whole conversation, there's a whole deal of like, what do you do after you've achieved your fantastic goal, after you've taken the president's palace, and you got through your revolution, but you still need to prove your worth, and so people
still need to pay all these people and give them something
perverse
to do.
incentive to drum up the next milestone. So.
The thing is, I say this to my friend who's works in a very prominent newspaper in a European country, I won't say which. They have like 4 climate writers on staff. What that means is every day there's at least one climate story on the front page. It's because they have 4 climate staff.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell how important is this, how relevant is it? Is this just make work for the people on staff whose job title has climate in it? And it's a bit like that in the Commission. The Commission spends years building up this new Department of Environment stuff or international development or whatever. Now we've got a new health one. There's always new ones coming along, and then they staff them, and then they're like, right, what's next? And then you just go, are we fixing a real problem here, or are we just like fiddling with something that's, probably fine if it's left alone? And you move further and further away from the core business of the single market. And I think that's what's happened. And I think the mission has creeped so much into the social stuff that I'm done with it now. Like, it's completely destructive.
What you are listening to has taken time and resources to prepare. It is a collaboration of committed journalists. Please, if you can, share, subscribe, or support this podcast in whatever way you can.
And the conflict with your department or whoever was in charge didn't come about because of anything you did at work directly, right? It was actually because
I think, yeah.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah.
How much are you able to go into it?
I can talk about it. My lawyers have all ditched me, so I can say whatever I want. Nobody wants to represent me because Belgium is too woke. If I was in Ireland, I might find someone. If I was in the UK, I'd have teams of people trying to help me, I think. But no, Belgium is too woke. The chances of... It should be noted also, just in the context of these cases, that if the UK was still in the EU at the time of the 4 Women Scotland judgment, do you know what I'm talking about, 4 Women Scotland?
Yep.
It's likely that case would have gone to Luxembourg, to the Court of Justice of the EU, and it would have turned out not in favour of the women. So we're in this mess, and the UK has escaped from it. But because we're still in this morass, there's not a chance in the world anyone's going to challenge the status quo. It's... Mm-hmm. Yeah, my case, I can say what I want, I think, and I have elsewhere. Well, I'll try and keep it brief. I set up an internal staff group called SEEN, which there's varieties of this all over the UK. We modelled it on the UK version, actually, which is a sex equality network inside your institution, where you get to talk about, your non-belief in gender ideology and your belief that we should protect women's base spaces. Now, I don't think that any job should have political affinity groups, honestly, but the Commission has them in spades. They have the LGBTIQ staff group, they've got the race one, they've got the disability one, they've got the women's one, they've got the this. And so in the UK, a lot of very smart people said, let's fight fire with fire. Let's set up a gender critical staff group. And would the core of it be a WhatsApp chat or in-person meetings, or both, or neither? Both. It began in the UK. The guys who set it up in the UK, it was started by a gay guy. I don't think I should say his name. I'm not sure if I can, so I won't. But he said first it was WhatsApp, and we were on Signal for a while, but without getting into the details of it, we did some things, activities, outreach, blah, 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 and we made very, very influential enemies from day one. Yeah. And my job was threatened very quickly. The first time I ever started posting about it on the staff intranet, my job was very explicitly threatened, because the type of contract I was on was going to make it easy to get rid of me. So there's all different types of contracts in the Commission. What is the staff intranet? Let's say everyone knows what an intranet is. But let's say we need to know what staff intranet means in the context of the EU. Right, so the Commission has about 30 to 40,000 staff, and they're all spread across different directorates, and the most of them in Brussels. Some are in Luxembourg. There's quite a few in Luxembourg. There's a couple in Italy. There's one in Spain, one in Netherlands, whatever. Ireland has one, Eurofound it's called. It's out in Grange Gorman. And basically everyone, I think almost all those directorates, agencies, etc., they have access to this platform, which when we started the SEEN network was quite old and finicky and based on, HTML type. It was crap. Yeah. And you were allowed to talk about things there. So there was a section.
That's it sounds so much like the kind of early unbridled internet that was almost a temptation to just start talking freely into it. It's like,
and there were people who were on there, just really angry. Like, it's not the kind of place you would, in normal circumstances, I would ever go near, because there were some people who were attracted to causing shit, stirring up trouble on the staff intranet, and I'm not one of those people. But there'd be people there who just like, especially when Gaza happened, it was a nightmare, But also, you have to imagine, in the commission, among these 40,000 people, you have people from the Baltic states who absolutely hate Russia, and then you have people from other states who are okay about Russia and don't hate them that much, and so you'd have like drama. People from Finland, people from Estonia, they would be like, get Sweden into NATO right now and all this stuff. And then other people who were like, oh, NATO's expanding too far and it's dangerous for our region, blah, blah, blah. So there'd be that kind of thing. You could fight about that.
Such controversial. I mean, how heavy and radioactive are these things? And yet you bring up this, you start to organize, and then you got targeted and you got...
It's the worst. It's the most sensitive topic.
Vaporized for that. Okay. Yeah, because they really feel their skin is in that game. The greatest risk of all for some of these people somehow is... It's
funny, isn't it? And I still don't I don't understand why, and I would love to genuinely understand why that is the case. There were things like NATO were controversial. The things like the Green Deal were controversial, because the Green Deal required, these targets that were quite difficult, and everyone who worked in the directorates for climate and environment and energy were like, well, hey, we're doing this, and climate finance and all this, and all the people who funded projects that were going to make it work, they're all totally for it. And then there was other people who are against it, and there'd be scraps on there all the time. But one day, I just think it's a really funny story. And how they all kicked off. One day, some German lad throws an absolute bomb into the staff intranet and says, have you seen that Germany's introduced this sex self-ID law? You can change your sex once a year. And he just mocked it, And immediately people were like, shut him down. Get this man off the intranet right now. Delete. Mods, where are you? Delete this post. And I'd never really looked at the intranet before. I had no interest in it. But a TERF who I knew nudged me and was like, hey, check this out. Somebody's talking about your topic on the intranet. Let's go. So I go check out the intranet. And by the time I see it, there's a whole fight has broken out on this thread. And it's like people are going, teacher, get this people punished, all the woke assholes, all these very young, blue-haired, obese activist types are all like, my name is Mix and you will respect my pronouns. Like, that has started to trickle in the last 5 years. They're like, get this man off the intranet, and they rallied the LGBTIQ staff group who's like, get this man, and they all piled on him, get rid of this man. It turns out the man, it was his last day, old German guy, retired and dropped the bomb and left everyone to scrap over it, which I just think is really funny. And so they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't ask him to take down whatever. So they just left it up. They couldn't, they couldn't get him to apologize or grovel, or they couldn't cancel him because he was off in the Riviera,
Yeah.
So I jump in, cracks knuckles, gets on there, starts saying, yeah, if you erase sex, it's really bad for women and girls. And this is absolute heresy, So starts to get fun, start to say more. I'm nudging other people who I know are TERFs on the inside saying, hey, check it out. And then some people are brave enough, most people weren't, to say, look, I'm not getting involved in that. But there's a few very diehard TERFs in there who we were just jumping on it. Shut this down immediately. Moderators, how can you do this? Oh my God, I'm suffering. This is violence. And somebody even called us TERFs, which is, I call myself a TERF, but in the context of work on the intranet, in this respectable environment, you just called me a TERF. How dare you? So we were being very, very respectable. And we had this word that we use all the time, which was, we have to be blameless. So completely blameless. So everything you put in there, nothing insulting. It's insulting by definition, because saying that you think sex is important is insulting by definition, for some people. But so we just had the crack on there for a while, but then it turned into something more serious where we said I first of all, I got called and said, listen, the type of contract you're on, that means you're on very shaky ground, and it could very easily be rescinded. So I get back on the internet as soon as I got off the call to that HR call, and I said, I've just had a call from HR that said if I speak about gender on the internet again, I'm going to be fired. So then it was, from that day on, it was a fight with HR, us against HR, us against the LGBTIQ group, us against all the allies, all the shocked and appalled people who worked in the directorate that hands out the money to these organizations. And basically a campaign kicked off for about 2 years to get rid of me. And right. I know that, to complain about us and to get rid of us and to not allow the Scene network to exist. And so we used to do really cheeky things, like we would join all their webinars, talking about inclusivity in the workplace. We would jump in as Scene network, and we would ask questions about what about women? It
sounds like, and this is pertinent to work. You're not just kind of, shooting into the breeze. This chat is actually meant to contribute to all of the, front-facing documents that you all create.
So you have the external stuff, and then you have internal workplace policy. And we just modeled ourselves on the other groups. So it's like, why is there a disability affinity group in the European Commission? Well, I don't think there should be any of these groups because it causes so many problems. But if there is a disability group, what do? Well, they have a special relationship with HR in that they get to contribute to design of workplace policy around accessibility, but they also get to be consulted when there's a new piece of actual EU legislation that concerns disability, along with all the other stakeholder groups. So we wanted that. We were like, right. We were going to HR very formal and very respectable and very blameless and saying, invite us when you we want to set up a relationship with you, like the same that you have with the LGBTIQ guys and with the disability guys and with the race guys. We want that. We are sex realist and free speech people, and we want to be listed on your page of affinity groups that you consult with, and we want a relationship. Rather than list us on the group, they got rid of the page. Rather than list us, they got rid of it.
No way they're going to allow
chance.
It. If you didn't contribute to the intranet, could you be gradually in trouble?
What do you mean? If I hadn't done that, would I?
I mean, like any employee in your level horizontally, or will have access to the intranet, but are you kind of obliged to chip in and talk and pretend that you care about all the stuff going on there?
No, absolutely not. And my boss, the first time he found out this was going on, my line manager, which is very different from the senior people in a completely different building far away who ultimately fired me. My line manager was really happy with my work and loved working with me and stuff, but he said, I heard you've been saying stuff on the intranet, and he said to me, it's only really dodgy people who post on there. Like it's not it's like,
yeah, it's a bit like it's a bit like having the suggestions box in work or something, and then the one person who works up the courage to put something in there, gets thrown into HR and sort of shot in the head and carried out the back in a box.
There's some people who are a bit
only
nutty.
Only a weirdo would actually took. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. There's just nutty people. And I think that's how the first time he spoke to me about it, I think that was the message he was trying to pass to me, was like, people are going to think you're a weirdo if you post on there. And I was like, right, well, you have a bit of a problem now, because the Commission did this to themselves. Every company who does this has done it to themselves. You allowed people to set up affinity groups. You listed them on a special page dedicated to them. You invite them for consultation. And now here we are. And we have a very legitimate aim and cause. And you have set yourself up for this issue. And so I am completely entitled to post whatever I want on the internet. And if you stop me from doing it, it means you're treating me differently to the way you're treating all the other people. So just to give a really good example of the contrast between my topic and other topics, when the war broke out in Gaza, Israel, there was immediately, especially Irish staff, kicked into full gear, organising the protests, bake sales, fundraisers, marathons.
Oh, the bake sales. Great.
Oh, yeah. To raise money for Palestinian children. No shade on Palestinian children. Very good cause, etc., etc. I'm just making a comparison between this topic and other topics. They printed T-shirts that said EU Staff for Peace with the EU logo. And every Thursday for the last few years, they have stood outside the Secretariat building in the middle of Brussels institutions and had a big noisy protest about the EU's deal, whatever it is, with Israel.
While being employed there. So that's
while
no
being
problem.
employed there.
Wow.
So
wow.
they have set up this problem for themselves that if they shut me down for talking about gender, which they did, so they said they deleted the German guy's tweet that went on for ages and had just all sorts of, just turned into Twitter. That got deleted.
Not
and it
actually,
was replaced.
not actually a tweet. Let's clarify. It was not a tweet. It was a post in your
No.
green screen weirdo EU intranet. Yeah. Okay.
It was the old school, horrible HTML 1990s thread, and it was replaced with a message saying no more talk of gender on the staff intranet. Now, can you just imagine how sensitive that must be? So we had meetings with HR and said, we went to the diversity and inclusion office and we were like, please support us, help us, because we are being discriminated against on the basis of a protected belief, which is non-belief in gender identity, and the promotion of workplace policies that are conducive to the well-being of men and women and gay people. Like, that was our deal. Like, and they just fobbed us off for years. But so yeah, we would show up to their webinars. We would nominate each other for the diversity awards, so we had to get invited to the awards and stuff. And so I just think this is so funny. We had such good crack with it. At the same time, we have photos of us in the diversity and inclusion awards ceremony as runner-up, you know, as the people who everyone was trying to get fired, you know. And so the day, so I got fired, and then after I got fired,
did anyone else lose their job?
No, but one of the closest TERF colleague on the inside got promoted. So I was really paranoid because she was like, a few days after the week I got fired, she's like, oh, sorry, yeah, I can't talk about it now, and let's have a big long talk about it. But I actually, my boss has just promoted me, so I need to talk to him about that. And I was like, hold on a second, because she can't be fired. She's a lifer. So I was like, are they trying to sweeten her up? I don't think that was the case now, but that was
do you say wifer or lifer?
A lifer.
A lifer.
She can't be fired.
Okay.
You know?
Why can't she be fired?
Because of her long you don't get fired.
Okay.
You just don't get fired. Like, it's like the civil service. You don't get fired. You'd have to do something really, really bad, and not just have the wrong opinion. And she has a legacy in there. She started up a women's group many years ago. She's like a proper peace and love radical feminist type. The other people who were TERFs were sort of like maybe a bit more conservative background. Some are free speech advocates. Some were just like Eastern European Orthodox Church. What the fuck is this? Like, you know, there was but this woman in particular she says to me, no, it had nothing to do with you that I got promoted. And I'm like, because she does deserve it. She's a great worker. So we're just going to assume that that's why she got a promotion in that same week. I hope she's not listening to this, because she'll give out to me.
But how come you were the only one fired then?
Because my contract was the only one that allowed it.
I got you. Okay. You were on almost this. I once worked in Paris as an English teacher, and they would give you a nice salary, but then built into it, you know, the classic thing. They don't want to employ you full time as a contract durée indéterminée. They just give you a short-term contract and then renew it. And it makes that they can get rid of you if they want.
Right. Well, I was on an even worse situation than that, but yeah, it's like that's like a 0 hours thing. I was on a contract, so this is a detail that maybe is just overkill, but maybe cut it out if you want. But the Commission had me on an illegal 0 hours, or not 0 hours, but fake freelance contract that they had just issued. They just introduced new legislation against in the platform work directive. It said you can't work 40 hours for someone and not be employed by them. They should treat you as an employee and give you all the protections. But I was working for the Commission as a self-employed person who was not allowed to have other clients, and who was supposed to be available from 8 to 8 every day, 40 hours a week. And on paper, with an intermediary supplying me to DG Grow, on paper, I had no relationship with the Commission. So when Michael Schellenberger interviewed me shortly after this happened, for reasons about free speech I'll get into, he contacted the Commission, and they were like, oh, we don't know who that person is, and we wouldn't comment anyway. And somebody else from a German newspaper contacted them and said, did you really fire this person? And they can say no. And that's why my lawyer first said to me, oh my God, this is medieval. You have a really good case here. What they've done is insane. And then once he figured out the details, he was like, all right, you know what, I'm not touching this. So he said it's going to be too difficult for you to prove that you were working for the commission full time. And that's bullshit, because I have a commission laptop. I'm in there all the time. You know, I have all this paper trail of emails all day, every day, starting from 8 in the morning saying, do this by 11, do this by 2, do this by 3. You know, it's like, so that's bollocks. But, when I got fired, very soon after, there was a webinar hosted by one of the internal unions on freedom of speech, or what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say as an EU staff member. And we think that this was part of a crisis communications thing that happened after I got fired. I don't mean to be arrogant and think that it was caused by me, but it seems like linked, that they had this webinar where they said, right, we're going to tell you what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say. And an absolutely astonishing meeting that somebody live streamed to me as I was, you know, everyone sends me stuff from in there now. And in that webinar, the poster for the webinar said Gaza, vaccines, Iran, Ukraine, or something like that, not gender. You know, they were like, what are the sensitive topics that, you know, people get up in arms about? And they couldn't even put the word gender. And yet it's the only topic that was ever barred from discussion on the intranet. You know, this is how sensitive it is. And so the very moment that webinar was going on, in which I have the screenshots, they said, if you talk shit about the commission under a pseudonym, we will find you. We have relationships with the authorities and member states, and we will figure out your identity. So don't you dare go talking shit about us online, or we will find you. No, this has never happened before. This was never part of the policy before. And also, what can I advocate for? And it's like, well, you're your own person, but you represent the commission, so you can't be having political opinions. You know, on that same day, as that webinar was happening, was this Thursday EU Staff for Peace Palestine Bake Sale Marathon T-shirt jamboree out in the middle of the main street, you know? And so I went there to them and I said, hey, I see that there's new rules now. It seems there's a webinar happening today, and they're talking about like how you can't represent you have to make clear that your positions, whatever they are, have nothing to do with the commission, and also you can't talk about sensitive topics. I was like, have you ever heard of any of that? Have you ever been, you know, warned or reprimanded or cautioned or whatever about doing this very, very political thing in the middle of the road every week for years with your Palestine t-shirts, etc., and essentially making demands of the commission that they change their policy on something? And they were like, no, never heard of anything like that, you know? So there's basically what it comes down to is that the commission is so threatened by this topic that they've created an entire nightmare for themselves by firing me, because it was completely illegal. And now I have some Catholics who are planning on maybe representing me and making a real big deal out of it. You know, all of this to stop people talking about gender, because all the rest of this stuff is still going on. Everyone's still talking about Gaza and Iran and NATO and Ukraine and the Green Deal. Nobody stopped. It's gender has been shut down. So it's very sensitive inside the commission, and they're absolutely captured 100% by this topic. And I don't really, we used to write emails to Ursula von der Leyen and to the Minister for the Commissioner for Justice, an Irish guy, Michael McGrath, and say, listen, we're here to help, you know, we're here to help you with this, because this is not going away. It's a huge deal. People are real upset about it all over Europe. You're about to enforce it on candidate countries. It's run by it's demands of a very niche extremist bunch of activists who are not very representative of anyone at all. It's based on lies and subterfuge and secrecy. So you want to nip it in the bud. And if you want to nip it in the bud, we are your staff members. We are loyal. We are on your side. We want the union to be a success. We want to tell you about where you've gone wrong on this. And if you want, we are very open to have a relationship where you can consult with us and see where maybe you're even breaking the law. And they rejected us over and over and over again. So fuck them. You know?
When you were fired, you obviously started to decide what to do with all your time. I think the answer is pretty clear, where you've moved your energy. But I immediately thought of Helen Joyce, who made a remark. Helen Joyce, you said she's from, did you say she was from
Wicklow.
Dublin? She's from Wicklow,
From
yeah.
Bray, yeah.
She's from Bray, huh? Yeah, she had a career in The Economist, and I think she was she a mathematician in a university as well?
She was, yeah.
Yeah, she's a brilliant person and got involved in this subject, and she got cancelled. She's explained it by way of answering, the accusation that you have become obsessed with this, unduly obsessed with the topic. But she said, well, when I started to talk about it, my other avenues of income were cut off. Now it's become my kind of career. So she's been, railroaded towards it in that sense. You're passionate about it too. And you have your own ways of going about things. I think you're still trying to figure some of it out. I mean, your interviews are great to listen to. But I think there's more to be engaged with in Ireland. You have said in the past, maybe I would move back to Ireland. I think you've changed your mind about that a little bit now, but you also said that you think Ireland isn't beyond saving. You've said that you just described the bureaucracy in Europe as completely captured, but you think Ireland could somehow be saved. What do you mean by that?
I just sort of feel like, and I said this to Helen Joyce actually recently, I think Ireland is savable. And she immediately went, oh yeah, I do too, actually. It's like, I haven't really tried to articulate it before, but Irish people, the bureaucracy in Ireland is captured, but they're very, very sensible people also there. I mean, every place is kind of the same. You've got a group, let's say 400 people in a department or in a whatever, and then there's one mom who's trans to her lesbian daughter, and then suddenly everyone has to go along with that. Those people aren't insurmountable. We need to get to a place where we can say, listen, you have your troubles. We're not going to be able to set the agenda anymore. I don't know how we're going to get there, but we are going to get there. I feel like there are just so many sensible people in the Irish civil service and in Irish institutions. I also think that I think it could, I sometimes wonder, this is why I hate the Irish Times. I hate the Irish Times with passion, because all it would take is for somebody to have the balls to say, listen, there have been questions about this for years. We really need to get to grips with it. And and then the omerta might be broken. And the same with a leader. You could have a political leader. Ken O'Flynn is great now, but you could have a political leader from a mainstream party who says, listen, this is far more complicated than we ever let on, and we're going to have to go back to the drawing board with this without hurting anyone's feelings too much. But maybe, some people are going to not get everything that they want, but sure, look, we have a problem here. It requires a little bit of leadership. I feel like it has burrowed very deep into the EU, into the UK institutions, and they have the best TERFs, they have the best people, and they're really undoing it. All is forgiven TERF Island. They're really doing a brilliant job of doing it the respectable way. And I think in Ireland it would just take a political change of direction and we could undo it all. Right. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but there is a fairly prominent ex-lefty party MEP who are in Ireland who's setting up a challenge, not a legal challenge, but she's trying to organise the scatterbrain TERFs into one cohesive entity to fight this. I think people are persuadable. I think the machine is smaller. And I just sort of think I hear the politicians talking about it, I'm like, they know it's bullshit. They're just desperate for a way out. So if we had, some people from left-wing or mainstream parties who were able to all people need is permission to say it.
Right, it's class of typical Ireland. Although we're speaking of the Republic, and I noticed you posted just some recent news out in Belfast. A woman who worked for the Belfast Film Festival had an employment claim that was found not in her favour. And it was something similar. She was, I think she was called into question. Basically, was she actually fired or was she frozen out of her duties and put into suspension for appearing at one of these events?
Did she leave out of stress? pushed out, sort of. I can't
Okay.
actually remember. But she spoke the problem in Northern Ireland is a bit like our problem. I did an episode with her about it, about peace money. So a lot of money came into Northern Ireland, obviously, after the end of the Troubles, and it fueled the NGOcracy. It supercharged it, and everyone who's a good person has an NGO job, and this is part of the NGO mindset, is like all trans all the time. And so she was like, well, you know, she helped set up a rape crisis center, and she's like, well, some men shouldn't be allowed into rape crisis centers, surely. And then they went for her, and her story is one of the worst witch hunts I've ever heard, because there's a detail in it that just still sends shivers down my spine. They all ganged up on her to try and get her fired. They even went to the place where she gets coffee. They went to the place the woman who did her tattoo, and said, have you yet contacted her employer to tell them to fire her? So this is like insane. And she told me
activists did it, or NGOs did it?
Well, they're the same
both?
thing in Northern Ireland, I think. Okay. So if you're in a social justice NGO, you are an activist. You're a salaried
activist. Of course,
activist.
Sorry, But someone who's actually being paid to do that. Thought that was part of their job, to get someone else to lose their job. Right.
So it's real mean girl schoolyard shit, I think, you know. Are you still friends with her, you know? And so they did this to Sarah Morrison, is her name, and she told me that for ages she had to go to a supermarket outside of town because she couldn't face seeing people in the supermarket. And this has happened to me as well. You realize when you bump into someone on the street, and you realize immediately that they haven't taken your side on this, and then you go, oh shit, you know. And it's really hurts your feelings.
Ironically enough, she was an inclusion development coordinator. And within the evidence put forward to the tribunal, Mark Cousins, the film critic who's on the board of the festival, seemed to be submitting emails saying we can't have an inclusion development coordinator who isn't on the right side of this. So I think it's emblematic for me, and what I find so interesting about it. And I'm not sure what I think. I feel like I'm still learning. I think I probably might not agree with you about some of the really visceral details in some of it. But you would know more. I know that
Let's
it divides.
Tell me.
It divides people. It divides.
Yes.
It has divided feminists, and it has obviously divided the gay rights community, for want of a better word. It's been very interesting to reveal. I'm not sure which divide I find more interesting. I can't decide that either. But to watch them take chunks out of each other, it's been strange. Where do you really, but I also kind of feel it is, and it's when I try to understand biology and psychiatry involved, I feel like it is chaotic. I feel like you're looking into something that is, first of all, even people who espouse serious pro-trans points of view, they disagree with each other. The so-called science behind it is unsettled and ultimately very, very wild, and I think quite mad. But that in of itself it adds to all this sort of general sense of chaos. Nobody quite knows what to make of anything because the ground is uncertain and unsteady. This is where people are. Yeah, and if this kind of vagueness, it like adds into tremendous advantage. And I often can't help get the feeling that if you're a teenager, for all those classic reasons, if you know, like, I don't know, like think of the swarm of kids who are in The Crucible by Arthur Miller. It's obvious, and this is a known thing with teenage girls. It's not unique to them, but it is a thing that, you know, there's a kind of mania that can take over. Once you realize you can invert the adult world, you can really kick over, the kind of power advantage that all the adults in the room have, and you can do so by a gesture that just involves yourself, your own body, and some declaration. And I can't but help the feeling that somewhere behind a lot of this, something of that nature is going on. So I've really tried to look at what they call social contagion, what Colette Culfer in Cork you put me onto, has been able to pick out as the religious comparison, and you yourself are interested in that in the Irish context, how this may have taken the role of religion in some form, and hence that makes it kind of more dangerous for people to be like outside of it. If you're considered to be like a downcast person, like in the old days, a young woman who, not even that old days, but a young woman who got pregnant outside of wedlock, they're suddenly at the risk of scapegoating. all of that is in the mix. So it's quite dangerous, and it explains the weird behavior and intensity that which people take to trying to vanquish someone they see as on the wrong side of it. You know,
I think if you strip away all the names of movements or whatever and just look at how people have behaved in human history, the frenzied commitment to an idea, the internal sorting of what it all means, and then the swarming together, the exclusion of non-believers, it's, you can make comparisons about this religion, that religion, whatever, but there's something going on. I think if you just strip away all the names and the church denominations, or whatever, and just say to yourself, all throughout history, people have come together according to a belief, and then they've done everything to protect it, and that's just what's happening again. I think Colette Colfer was one of the earliest people to write about this, and she wrote really, really well about it. She knows a lot about organized religion. I sort of feel like, right, this is very simplistic, but people have been talking about it a lot, but the fall of the church, we have no religion anymore, people looking for meaning. Here is one, here is a meaning. This talk that's been going on, idea, but it's been circulating more recently, which is that the World War II and Hitler were our ultimate moral guide star of what not to do. So we used to have Jesus. What would Jesus do? What would big boss man Jesus do? We go in that direction. Now Jesus is gone. What has replaced him? We don't have anything, but we did really, really bad things just happened. So what would Hitler not do? So that's us. That's how we organize our moral universe now. And so I like this idea. So we had the church, I remember I grew up like all of us, Catholic, whatever, not really thinking about it, wasn't really sure, was Jesus real? Did he exist? Or was he God? What was the deal there? I never really quite figured it out, never thought about it, never cared about it, but it suddenly stopped when I was about 12 and I just never went to mass again. But there was this sort of thing like Jesus, or whatever Jesus did was good, and if he did what Jesus did, that was good. But we just lost that. And I just imagine the ripping the rug out of an entire culture all of a sudden, and that's all gone. How do people know what they're supposed to do anymore, even if it's very subconscious, even if these decisions take place at a very subconscious level about what's good, what's bad? And so we have this, like, I'm not a philosopher, I don't know anything about philosophy or anything, but I know that there's this like reducing harm principle is one way of like working it out, what causes the least amount of harm to the least amount of people or whatever. Utilitarianism, yeah. I can't really talk about that at length, but I do notice with why woke would arise, which is, and I use Eric Kaufman's definition of woke. I think it's the one that makes most sense to me, is that woke is the making sacred of previously marginalized groups. So you look at who was downtrodden in the past. Well, that's why transvestites took over women as more worthy of our sympathy and concessions, because, well, women did really well there for a couple of decades in the 70s and 80s, and they're fine now. But look at these poor guys, these deranged, delusional men who would just love to be women. Surely it's their turn now. But then there's no limiting principle to that. So that can just keep getting weirder and weirder as we're seeing. But I think Irish society in particular, because we were so strongly attached to this institution of the church, I think the NGO-ification of society then. So I've been writing about this for Quillette for years. So John Kay from Quillette asked me to write a story about Ireland, how Ireland got like this. And I started writing the story years ago, and I had to write to him and say, listen, I can never finish this story because the story is still going on. But what I think the broad strokes that most people can agree with, and I think you've talked about this before as well, is that when the Brits left, the church took over, and then when the church fell into disrepute, NGOs took over, because the church had provided all the services in terms of education, health, and also like social services like battered women, fallen women, all that stuff. So suddenly it was the job of the Irish state to take over from the church and start, and a really good example is free legal aid. So back in the 80s or whatever, people like Mary Robinson were like, hold on a second, poor people have no money to pay for legal representation over custody disputes or whatever. We need the government to do this. And then the government's like, oh, we don't have the expertise. So they were like, right, we're lawyers and we're smart. Let's set up an organization called FLAC, so Free Legal Aid Clinic. So that becomes an NGO that provides a very vital service, and they're doing service provision. And the same with Dublin Rape Crisis and all of these groups were set up because they were providing a service that the state couldn't manage to provide. So the state says, well, we'll pay for you to do it then. So this is how this all kicked off. And then at some point it switched from service provision to awareness raising. And it's really funny, just based on my trip in Albania last week, I spoke to an Albanian woman about it, and she said, there's so much bad stuff going on in Albania with women's rights, especially foreign women who are being trafficked into the country and all this stuff. All the women's shelters are full of foreigners who are being abused and trafficked and pimped out, foreign women. And she said, and while all this was happening, the UN Women that is has an office in Albania was doing a drawing competition. Like a drawing competition to raise awareness of some bullshit, and they're not spending their time or effort or money on doing something about these awful situations. So a lot of these organizations, problems are really difficult to solve, so you can just raise awareness of the problems instead of actually.
It sounds like Ireland to me also.
That's what yeah, that's
also
what went
these
on
kind
in
of
Ireland
fake institutions we have. Like there's huge problems in Ireland at the moment with TUSLA. We won't go into it, but it seems obvious to me that TUSLA, by engaging all these service providers, are able to also engage in a kind of deflection, because maybe in some sense they just don't even have the internal resources. Even at an individual level, perhaps people don't want to take responsibility for some of the horrible, complex issues that can arise.
It's very hard
in that job. So then they hand it over to a possibly really unsuitable service provider, and then they ultimately don't have to take the blame. But there was some strange dynamics like that with the state and the church in Ireland. You remember, people would be handed over to the church, and then the state, in theory, didn't have to worry. Of course, later on, all the institutions the state was running too. Someone who appeared on our podcast was from the North Inner City. He grew up, he does a tour. Terry Fagan, who was one of the last episodes last year, he grew up beside the Magdalen Laundry there. He'll tell you all about what it was like being right next to that, and people he knew, getting drawn into it. He was put into a state-run school and was abused there. They all sue the state, and, it's this this is like the endless kind of like inquisition now, is to find out who is guilty, and people trying to evade guilt. So deflecting is a key part of this whole game.
And also,
I find it remarkable also. I mean, I have to point out, we could have said it 10 minutes ago, but the fact that Maynooth is now the kind of center of all woke is too rich an irony to avoid pointing out. It's absolutely amazing that locale, somewhere near the center of Ireland too, kind of, it's where the kind of high priests of this whole thing, they hang out, and they make sure, I'm sure some disagree with each other, but they're definitely hanging out there. Yeah.
If you were an alien who came down from space and observed the situation, you'd say, "Oh, this church has reestablished itself on its own in its old stomping ground." Like, that's just what it would look like. These are the new moral arbiters, whatever way you pronounce that word. These are the people who set the moral standards, benchmarks, and everyone's living up to them. It's like, oh, they don't have necessarily the garments, and actually, in the old day, it was repressive, and this day, it's permissive. But it's about sex ultimately. A lot of it is about sex, which just shows you, it's the same thing all over and over again. What were you saying there about? Oh yeah, so this thing is doing the rounds about Hitler being our new Jesus. So anti whatever Hitler did, do the opposite of it. I was trying to say to a British TERF recently that we don't have a Hitler as much as the continental Europeans do. Hitler's bad, and we all know that, obviously, but we were neutral and we hated Winston Churchill, so it was different for us to see him as a sort of anti-Hitler in a way. But we did have, I think that the church and the priests took on that role. And so for us, for Irish morality now is whatever the church would have done, do the opposite, and you're on a good track. And so I
which is mad, which is insane. Yeah, it's insanely hard to do that because the church had too much involvement in things that were good. I mean, the religion itself as well, the core of it as well. I mean, many people have gone in to this idea that woke is a kind of just a converted Christianity with the idea that you find in the Gospels of going after the most rejected and vulnerable person and including them into your group. I mean, that is really the starting dynamic in the Gospels, right? But then he also cures the stuff. Whereas there's a perverse incentive, I think, in some of this to make yourself more unable, make yourself stand out, make yourself more make life harder, the self-medicalization thing. But
anyway. I think that the like, if you were to put these people in an MRI machine, which I really want to do one day, hopefully we'll be able to do it, and try and figure out what their deal is, you'd probably see that, like, they are staking out a role for themselves in this new institutionalized morality, which is based on whoever was hard done by in the past. They're your lead, they're your gods now, and also whatever the church did, that's all we have to know. They did it, it was bad, and it's a real stupid thing to have taken hold. But then it's also full of just careerists and opportunists who are saying, right, this is the system now, right, I'm going to rise to the top in this system, whatever it is.
Exactly.
You know, so a lot of people are not thinking about people aren't thinking about any of this. They're just adjusting to the system as it is today, just like the nuns who ran the institutions adjusted to the system. And also another parallel is that, and I said this to you a couple of times before, but I have no beef with anyone's religion, and I think Christianity is all well and good. No criticism there. What I talk about when I talk about this is the institution of the Roman Catholic Church as it manifested in Ireland in the 20th century, and places like the Magdalen Laundries and the mother and baby homes and stuff. People were going along with a system that was absurd on its face, but they couldn't tell because they were in it. We're in another system that is absurd, but we're in it and we can't really tell. And it's, I think people were just going along with what was on the table at the time, but it didn't mean that it wasn't fucking terrible in some ways, and we're just doing it again.
You don't use the word transgender, you use the word transvestite only.
Yes.
I probably would say transgender. I don't really think it matters too much, but what do I mean when I say it? So many parts of this mosaic, they don't fit together. That plays into the advantage of people who are determined that the mosaic should spread and everyone should support it. But anyway, I was going around Wicklow today. We went for a coffee. There's a trans person there. Like, it's a guy, young guy. He's quite beautiful in ways, and he's growing boobs. This is like really common, right? This is like obviously more people with hormonal and other treatments and on their bodies going around Dublin. I see them in like Temple Bar, the places where I used to see goths, in the 90s, and I see girls with mustaches and things. Anyway, this person is I can tell, fairly a gentle person, okay, obviously projecting that. They're not a rabbit. They're not a transvestite, actually, because he's dressed pretty well neutral, but has changing their body rather than just their clothes. So, can you address a person like that, or people who are buying into and adopting that identity with something other than scorn? Do you think that they're deserving of sympathy?
I don't think it's scorn, because transvestite is just like a totally, like 20 years ago saying he's a transvestite. Transvestite is a very normal, neutral term for a guy who likes to dress up in women's clothes. There's a man who runs a transvestite club in Dublin. This is super interesting if you could ever get this guy to talk to you. So he's been there from the very beginning. He runs a little club. He's basically built a flat with a pub in it where he does nights out for transvestites. And one day he agreed to meet me off the record, and we spent hours together talking about this situation. And he said to me, he was completely against this new turn of the transgender stuff, because it didn't make any sense to him. He's like, some men just like to dress up in women's clothes and relax, and they're called transvestites, and that's what we do. And he doesn't agree at all. You know, the idea that transvestite is a dirty word is just like crazy to him, because he's like, we were all transvestites. We were like, I'm a transvestite, you're a transvestite, let's have a transvestite evening, you know.
Right.
He's like, and then suddenly it turned into this really, really nasty word. The reason I say
I'm thinking of Eddie Izzard too. Eddie Izzard for years and years and years would defend this identity, and then decided that he was actually trans after all that time. So he's an example of someone who said, no, I was wrong. In fact, I was transgender. It's just a little confusing. But by definition, though, someone who augments their body, it can't be a transvestite. There's something, you know, something else is happening. It's not clothes anymore.
Right. And so, I mean, it's all about your perspective and your experience and what you know about the topic and how you feel about the people who claim to have this identity. So the reason I use it is because I've spent years analyzing these men in their private groups. So I'm a member of hundreds of Facebook groups for men, whether they call themselves transgender, transvestite, transsexual, sissies, T-girls, femboys, sissy maids, whatever, all of them. I'm in all of them. And I'm on FetLife. I have accounts on FetLife where I'm hanging out with these guys who are, you know, they'll often have a clean account on Facebook and then a proper FetLife account, you know. And my takeaway, and also I've interviewed a lot of them. I've spent a lot of time talking to these people. Some people who call themselves transvestites, some who call themselves transsexuals. Some, the ones who go along with the transgender and the trans stuff tend to not want to talk to me because I threaten their whole world, the system. But what I have discovered is that there are men, and you're absolutely right to say that there are some men who are more concerned with bodily functions or features than they are about the clothes. They don't care about the clothes. They want tits. This is, so I know you know about the term autogynephilia.
Yeah.
Autogynephilia was a term used, conceived by a guy called Ray Blanchard, who studied these guys, and Michael J. Bailey is the other guy who's the most prominent in studying these before trans activists tried to destroy their lives, especially Michael Bailey's life. What it means, autogynephilia, is that you have an attraction to the idea of yourself as a woman. So autogynephilia, Ray Blanchard put it into 4 different categories. One was physiological, so get turned on by the idea of yourself having periods. So there's a viral video going around at the moment about a guy who's running for Senate in the US. A horrible video. He's clearly mentally ill, and he basically on his Reddit, somebody found his Reddit account and it says, yes, I menstruate, but I bleed through my anus. So this would be called, I'm so sorry if it's so crude, but it's the way it is. These people walk among us. Let's talk about them. So this is physiological autogynephilia, where, you know, the men who join lactating groups. So there are men who join groups for women who breastfeed, and their fixation, let's call it, is, breastfeeding a child or producing milk, or big mommy milkers or whatever. Then the other type is transvestic, which is the clothes. The other type is anatomical, which is having the bits. So the ones who are obsessed with having a vagina. And I can't for the life of me now remember what the other one was, but I know there were 4. One is having the body, one is having the physiological functions, one is the clothes. I can't remember what the other one was. So this is what he saw in his practice. He was able to categorize them as such. But in reality, the men who have this, let's call it condition, it starts generally by, they want to be perceived. So this is the important thing about this. This isn't a fetish that is like confined to yourself. I like to asphyxiate myself.
There's a component where they want to be seen to be women, right? Isn't this
of course
quite important according to it? Some people claim that in the last TV series of White Lotus, just to drop into some pop culture, there was a bizarre scene where a guy is in Thailand. Of course, a lot happens in Thailand that might be relevant here. But he gives this whole rant about having a debauched life. And at the end he goes, I wanted to be the girl, having been completely hetero, straight male. But he didn't just want to be, like, he wanted to talk about it and be seen to, I think. So anyway, supposedly this scene is kind of close to this kind of concept, this idea. And I have reflected on it, and I've thought it a bit, and I've tried to include in a kind of, more accepting or accommodating or affirming way, like what I remember of like Thailand and actually some other countries where you have weirdly, people claim the historical third sex is something that should be more blended in with trans. Don't really accept that myself, but it's a real thing. Like, you go to visit, like, you're gonna see it. It's on TV. Even China, where I lived, like, this, I ended up with a major celebrity, TV show host who was like male to female, surgery trans person. But anyway, let me finish the thought just briefly.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, these kind of people, there was a sense, by saying that, like, there's a TV show host, there was a sense often with Ladyboy and stuff, like, there really is a very demonstrative, performative, wanting to be seen aspect to it. It does seem to match on to some of what this concept, autogynephilia, tries to capture. But it's hugely shared by lots and lots of these people,
Right. Well, a few things about that. So Ray Blanchard, and he's unpopular among the TERFs because he's not sufficiently pure for many of us. I don't mind him at all, but he has separated this autogynephilia as one thing and HSTS as the other. HSTS means homosexual, transsexual. So these are two different groups of men, both have the same goal. And I don't know how much time we have, but I can explain how they came to be merged together. The men that you see in Thailand and, which are called ladyboys or katois, and then you have the Hydra in India, Warrior in Indonesia, Mushe in Mexico, Wahoo in Hawaii, like all over the world, in every country, Senegal, all the African countries, they'll have a word for this, and it usually means something like half man, half woman, or something like this. And what it is, and I don't know how people can't see this, it's just homophobia. Like, that's a very Western 2026 perspective on it, but it's a term that we all understand. This is homophobia because you cannot be a feminine boy in those cultures. So this is what I think is going on. A young boy, we don't really have words for it, and it's very taboo, but you can tell, in every classroom you'll see a little boy who you say, that kid's going to turn out to be gay. Everyone sort of sees it. I mean, it's not always super obvious, but sometimes it is. Those boys have a very tough time.
It's a hyper feminine, not just a bit, but really quite noticeable.
Hyper feminine, yeah. And we've all met men who can mask up, who can act straight, but these boys can't. So they reached in the shithole countries and worst places of the world, very poor places. There's some, very terrible cultures out there. They grow up, they are sexually pursued by straight men, constantly. So this is what's happening to those boys. These boys cannot be allowed to get away with being super feminine. You can't be a twink. I'm just going to use the word twink because it's shorthand, and it's, I'm told by gay friends that it's not offensive. So I'm just going to use that word because everyone knows what I mean.
No.
You can't be, no?
No, it's not offensive. I don't think anyone thinks it is anymore.
Yeah, I think it's a cute word. It's a twink. So you've got these twinks. They don't do well. They don't do well. People hate male, non-gender conformity in males. They absolutely hate it. And also men will sexually abuse you. And this is just an absolute fact of life. So what happens with these boys is in lots of cultures all over the world, they have been allowed to take on this third gender role. And the idea now that we're turning this around and saying, oh, this is a sign of enlightened, gender bendy, freedom, authentic self.
Yeah, that is wrong. That is not. It's a classic example of woke projection, desiring a potentially colonized culture to match your sense of justice and stuff. And that's if they're honest and smart, these kind of, people will tell you it's not true. They some of them might lean into it and they crave the acceptance of kind of Western.
But the thing is, like, if you're a twink, if you're a very twinky gay boy and you're 17 and you're beautiful and you're going to get a lot of male attention, you want a manly man. And so the way to get the kind of partner you want is to lean into the femininity. So if you're a gay man, and you want a macho man as a partner, the way to get a straight man is to be very, very feminine. And that's what a gamp is. That's a gyno-andromorph, a chaser in common parlance. But also there are men.
Andromorphophilia.
Gynoandromorphophilia. And so a lot of these gynoandromorphophiliacs are men who are chasers, who are interested in men who have both sets. They have the tits and the dick, and this is what they're into. But I'm not trying to say that all these relationships are fetishistic pursuits on behalf of straight men looking for she-males. They're genuine relationships out there. There's a really very good anthropologist whose own boyfriend is a Fa'afafine. His name is Paul Vasey, I think. Really interesting to talk to. So he studied these men in whatever place they're from, Haiti or Indonesia or something. So you've got these gay boys, can't get away with pretending to be straight, so they're allowed to function in this third sort of gender. Then the international NGOs come along at some point, only like 15, 20 years ago, and say, we need to work you into the concept of transgender to build our political constituency, but also because there's a huge problem of HIV in your population. How do we define you? How do we classify you? Yeah. So all of these big organizations started to say, right, there was actually a meeting in Barcelona in 2010 where all of these people were all of these gay third gender men, effeminate men, were flown into Barcelona to meet with all the transvestite, transsexual cross-dressers of the West who had been winning legal concessions in the European courts, where they all met up and said, what are we going to call ourselves? What are we? And then the travestis from Brazil didn't want to lose their travesti label because it's very culturally important to them to be called travestis. It has a meaning and a history and certain rights attached to it. So if they didn't want to lose it and call themselves transgender. And then there were the transsexuals who were like, we won all these rights. We don't want this like free for all. Anyone is trans. You are not the same as us. And we're worried that we're going to lose our rights. And then you had all the Fa'afafines and the ladyboys going, rights? What are those? You know, like, what are you talking about? And they all had this meeting and they were like, the HIV orgs were given money to help them treat HIV in these boys because they are so vulnerable. So when you hear this phrase, the most marginalized people in society, and you're like, oh, Tenny, Dublin are talking about being the most marginalized people in society and they're fat, autistic, well-off, upper-middle-class girls who have NGO jobs. What do you mean most vulnerable? What that phrase refers to is these overly feminine gay boys who are allowed to have these third gender roles and they're sexually abused in the poorest parts of the world. And what do they do to make money? They can make huge money if they drop out of school, grow tits and work as prostitutes.
Okay. So that's, but I still think you're a little bit far from that like young person I saw in Wicklow today, or this kind of like soft and gentle. You're capturing some of it by saying the femininity is there. You're young and you need guidance too. So like,
it's important to understand as well that that young guy that you saw, he may have been an autogynephilic male or he may have been a gay boy. Like, I don't know which one was he. They're quite different. We don't have necessarily, and I don't mean any harm on those people. They're just not women. That's what my whole point has always been. They're just, they can't change the legal system.
I agree with you on that. Can we just, before we get to the end, just like a last thing, because you're critical, path, like it's and it makes sense because a lot of this is built up around the fact that historically and the most prominent leaders in it have tended to be men wanting to be women or tending towards the opposite sex. But I found it also fascinating to read years ago through this woman Abigail Schreier. She wrote a book called, I think, Irreversible Damage. This is the whole weird issue of women, especially younger girls, like suddenly deciding that they're going to become boys. If you accept any of what Schreier said, and I think even people disagree would have to accept, she picked out an important explosion in figures, like thousands of % in the UK, references to the now closed down Tavistock clinic of young girls saying that now they're going to become boys. One explanation for this is that puberty has become so horrifying, or maybe it always was, but it's like an extra horrifying in Instagram and porn world that they are terrified of changes in the body, and that
also happening earlier as well is another factor.
Okay, so what have I answered the question already? Do you think that is what explains it, or how do you explain the female to male?
Well, you know, I've also spent lots of times in these women's groups. They don't tend to speak to me as readily as the men do. They're protecting a very fragile reality that they're trying to construct. What I think is, on the one hand, girls are subject to social contagion. Absolutely. You know, it has happened all throughout history. It will never stop happening. This is the thing, my feeling that I'm just stuck in the middle of a social contagion, a mania. These girls are following a trend, but most of them are autistic. So I'm in all these groups. It's just autism. I'm in parents groups as well. And it's all like, yeah, my son, Max, has autism. My son, has autism. They all have autism. And I think for a girl who, is going through puberty, I went through puberty once. It was horrific. I felt awful. I just hated my body. I don't think it's anything unusual. These girls look at, as you say, the soft porn of the perma scroll of Instagram and TikTok and stuff and say, I can never be that. And also the fact that I don't want to be that means that there's something different about me. I wonder what that difference is. Oh, look at this thing, this concept. And what I notice in their groups, so I'm in, as I said, the men's groups and the women's groups, and they are very, very different. And there's nothing that will establish more clearly that men and women are different than spending time in the groups.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine.
And the men, it's all porn and validation. It's all about like euphoria boners. I mean, they say that it depends which group you're in, but it's all about, oh, I just was so happy today because somebody didn't clock me, whatever, The girls, it's all about, how do I get rid of these tits immediately? Get these breasts off my chest right now. They do not care about being men. They don't want to be men. They've no idea. They've never even really thought about what it is to be a man. What they want to be is not women. 100%. Right. I think there are some autistic boys who are also like looking at what men are expected to be, looking at this brutish sort of Andrew Tate stuff and getting the blame. They're getting the blame for everything. They're being told they're terrible people. I have a teenage son, so I hate all this. They're being made feel bad for everything that happens in the world, and it's all their fault. And they're just like, I would like to opt out of that too. So I think there is a male version of it. But the girls are, as far as I can tell, they also, one thing you can tell is that they proudly show their mastectomy scars. So they're also not trying to just not be women. They're also trying to be trans. Like, trans is the identity that they're trying to lean into.
Right. And yet the legal outgrowth of it is not that we establish a third space, is that it's so strange because it's based on a philosophy you mentioned, Judith Butler, who originally was saying this is scale and performance. This is whatever you want it to be. There's just endless mass. And it comes right to the legal outcome of having attained victory. Now you're in charge. And you just start stamping a binary again, saying you must be treated as a woman. So this is where it gets really crazy incoherent. Then they put it to Judith Butler. She said, oh yeah, I meant what I said all the way, except in this case where it actually is binary and they really are women. They really are men.
Yeah, but I heard an interview with her once that shocked me because she calls herself non-binary now, and she got kind of annoyed because she's getting old and doddery now, and she got annoyed in an old and doddery woman way, and she was just sort of like, I didn't mean for this to turn out this way. My whole point was it's all a performance, that, it's all fluid all the time, and she was kind of annoyed that the youngians didn't get what she was trying to say, but she's just like, I've just resigned to it and I'm just going along with it now.
Okay.
But she,
I also think
true.
Like if Foucault as well, who almost had no interest in women, would be really baffled to see how important he's become to all of these feminists. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think we can wind it up. Is there any last comment you'd like to make about anything that we discussed?
About anything that we've discussed? No, I mean, what I would like people to know about is the medical stuff that is going on behind the scenes in Ireland. We're not going to get into it now, but I would just, there's some real bad stuff going on, and it is scandalous, and there will be a time not long in the future where people will say, "What did you not know about this?" And we'll be like, "Well, yeah, I sort of did, but you could lose your job for talking about it." Stop pretend. I just wish people would stop pretending they don't know. Like, there's a real bad thing going on. And I know I'm a harpy, shrill internet TERF, and we're all insane. And we are. You look at Twitter and you see all of us women going on about it all the time, this obsession. there's something there. There's real bad stuff going on, and you know, we have to look beyond. We have to get smarter about this and look beyond the slogans about peace and love and being your authentic self. I wish we had time to go into what's actually happening to Irish children, but Stella O'Malley has said that she's going to interview me about my trip to the Antwerp clinic where Irish people are getting treated soon. So I would ask people to, I would ask people to listen to that, because when you hear what they're ready to do to these children, I just, like, you know, I try to bring out the most extremes to show just how bad this thing is. And for some reason, I've been doing this for years and it hasn't been having an effect yet. And it's because people are afraid of losing their friends, getting kicked out of the WhatsApp group, losing their job, not, you know, being kicked out of their yoga class, whatever. You have to just, like, look at this thing that's happening. It's really, really historically, epically bad. That's all I would say.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there for now. And thanks for talking for so long.
Thanks, Luke.
Róisín.
Yeah, with pleasure.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Cassandra Voices is a multimedia project that seeks to highlight independent voices and inspire original thinking with stories from Ireland and around the world. Go to cassandravvoices.com online to read more and look out for more episodes from us in future. Your attention and your support are crucial. Thank you.